Life has a funny way of testing the foundations we build for ourselves. We spend years stacking bricks of ambition, love, and loyalty, only to have a single afternoon show us exactly how sturdy or how hollow those walls really are. For Dr. Elena Vance, that realization didn't come during a quiet moment of reflection. It came in the middle of a storm, on a day that was supposed to be the most important of her life. The morning started with the soft rustle of silk. Elena's wedding gown hung against the closet door of her apartment, a shimmering ivory beacon of the future she had planned with Julian Sterling. Julian was the scion of one of the city's most prestigious families, a man whose charm was only matched by the weight of his mother's expectations. Elena, a lead trauma surgeon at Metro General, had spent 3 years navigating the complex social waters of the Sterling family, always feeling like she was one missed dinner or one long shift away from being discarded. She was already exhausted, having pulled a double shift to clear her schedule for the honeymoon. As she sat in her kitchen, sipping black coffee and staring at the dress, her trauma pager let out a piercing, rhythmic scream. It was a sound she usually answered with adrenaline and focus, but today it sent a cold shiver of dread through her chest. At the hospital, the double doors of the emergency bay burst open before Alina even had her coat off. A stretcher flew past, a blur of blue scrubs and silver railings. On it was a young boy, no older than 7, his face the color of ash. A nurse shouted over the chaos, "Septic shock, multiple organ failure initiated, we're losing his pulse." Dr. Miller, the chief of surgery, caught Alina's eye. He knew it was her wedding day. Everyone did. "Vance, I know you're supposed to be at the Sapphire Plaza in 3 hours. I can try to find someone else, but the surgical team is thin, and you're the best we have for pediatric trauma." Elena looked at the clock. Then she looked at the boy's parents, huddled in the corner of the waiting room. The mother was clutching a small, tattered teddy bear, her eyes wide with a terror that Alina felt in her own bones. In that moment, the ivory dress and the expensive flowers felt like they belonged to a different person. "Get him to OR3, Elena said, her voice steadying. "I'm scrubbing in." The surgery was a descent into a different world. Inside the operating room, the sun-drenched afternoon outside ceased to exist. There was only the rhythmic beep of the vitals monitor, the sharp scent of antiseptic, and the intense heat of the surgical lights. The boy, Leo, was slipping. Every time Elena thought they had stabilized the infection, another complication arose. 4 hours passed. Her hands began to cramp, and sweat soaked through her surgical cap, but she didn't waver. She was a woman who lived for the golden hour, that critical window where life and death played a high-stakes game. Finally, the alarm stopped. The frantic rhythm of the heart monitor smoothed into a slow, healthy cadence. Leo was stable. He was a fighter, and Elena had given him the ground he needed to stand on. As she stepped out of the OR, the weight of the day crashed down on her. She checked her phone in the locker room. 64 missed calls. Most were from Julian, but the last dozen were from Beatrice Sterling, his mother. The wedding ceremony had been scheduled to begin 30 minutes ago. Elena didn't have time to go home. She grabbed the simple, white shift dress she kept in her locker for professional dinners, splashed cold water on her face, and ran for her car. She drove toward the Sapphire Plaza with her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept rehearsing her apology. Surely Julian would understand. He knew she was a doctor. He knew that saving a child was the only thing that could have kept her away. When she pulled up to the hotel, the valet didn't move. The grand entrance was blocked by a wall of people. As Alina stepped out of the car, she realized it wasn't a random crowd. It was the Sterling family. The aunts in their fascinators, the cousins in their tailored suits, all standing like a firing squad on the marble steps. At the center stood Beatrice Sterling. She wore a hat that looked like a structural marvel and a scowl that could freeze the midday sun. "Don't bother coming inside, Elena," Beatrice said, her voice carrying across the plaza with practiced ease. Elena stopped, her breath hitching. Beatrice, I am so sorry. There was a crisis at the hospital. A 7-year-old boy was dying on the table. I couldn't just walk away and let him go. Beatrice let out a sharp, mocking laugh that made the relatives behind her titter. A child, always a child, or a car wreck, or a burst appendix. You've always used your calling as a shield to hide your lack of respect for this family. Today was about Julian. It was about our legacy. And you chose a stranger over your husband. He isn't a stranger to me, Elena said, her voice trembling but firm. He's someone's son, and Julian isn't my husband yet. I need to talk to him. Please let me through. Julian's sister Clara stepped forward, blocking the path. You chose the hospital, Elena. You've spent 3 years choosing the hospital. We decided it was time to choose someone who actually wants to be a Sterling. Elena felt a cold hollow open up in her stomach. What are you talking about? Beatrice stepped closer, her eyes glittering with a cruel triumph. Julian is inside. He's already taken his vows. He married someone who understands that a wife's place is at her husband's side, especially when the world is watching. The world seemed to tilt. He married someone else. Today, in the last hour, Laura has always been a better fit for him, Beatrice said, referring to Julian's childhood friend, a woman who had spent years hovering at the edge of their relationship. She was there, she was ready, and most importantly, she didn't have an emergency to attend to. Elena felt the ground disappear. She had given Julian everything. She had worked 80-hour weeks to support them while he started his firm. She had endured his mother's barbs and his family's coldness, believing that their love was the anchor. But the anchor had been made of paper. I need to hear him say it, Elena whispered. He doesn't want to see you, Clara snapped. You humiliated him. You left him standing there like a fool in front of the most powerful people in the state. Just as Elena felt she might collapse, the deep, powerful hum of a high-end engine rumbled through the plaza. A sleek midnight black Rolls-Royce pulled up directly behind Elena's modest sedan. The crowd went silent. In this city, that car belonged to only one man, Alexander Thorne, the reclusive billionaire whose influence touched every industry from tech to shipping. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with a presence that seemed to pull the oxygen out of the air. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, but his eyes were sharp. He ignored the Sterling family entirely and walked straight to Elena. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. Elena blinked, trying to clear the haze of shock. Mr. Thorne. He took her hand, his grip warm and grounding. I've been at the hospital. I was the one pacing the hallway while you were in surgery. That boy, Leo. He's my son, my only child. A collective gasp rippled through the Sterling clan. Beatrice's face went from a triumphant red to a pale, waxy gray. Alexander continued, his voice getting louder so every person on those steps could hear. The doctors told me it was hopeless. They said the infection had progressed too far. But then they told me Dr. Elena Vance had refused to give up. They said she stayed past her own wedding bells to ensure my son had a future. He turned his head slightly to look at Beatrice and the rest of the Sterlings. And I arrive here to find you treating a hero like a common trespasser. Beatrice stammered, her voice losing its edge. Mr. Thorne, you don't understand. This is a private family matter. Elena was late for her own ceremony. It was a matter of honor. Alexander stepped toward her, and Beatrice instinctively moved back. Honor. You speak of honor while you replace a woman of substance with a placeholder. You speak of honor while you condemn a doctor for saving a life. He looked back at Elena. Dr. Vance, if this is the family you are joining, then I believe the universe has just done you a tremendous favor. Elena looked at the hotel doors. For the first time, she didn't feel the urge to run inside. The desire to explain herself to Julian had vanished, replaced by a searing, white-hot clarity. Alexander was right. A man who could be pressured into marrying another woman within an hour of a missed ceremony was not a man worth her life. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was Julian. She answered it on speaker. Elena, Where are you? Julian's voice sounded frantic, but there was an underlying weakness to it that she had never truly admitted to seeing. My mother says you're outside. Please just go away. We had to do it. The guests were talking. Laura stepped in to save the day. We can talk about this later. There is no later. Julian, Elena said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, calm, cold, and utterly final. You didn't marry Laura to save the day. You married her because you're a coward who can't stand up to your mother, even when your fiancé is saving a child's life. You didn't just lose a bride today, Julian. You lost the only person who actually saw something in you worth loving. She hung up and looked at Alexander. I'd like to leave now. My car is yours, Alexander said. He signaled to his driver, then looked back at the Sterlings. And as for the Sterling family, I'll be reviewing my company's contracts with your firm on Monday morning. I find I don't care to do business with people who lack a basic moral compass. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena walked to the Rolls-Royce, her head held high. As the car pulled away, she saw Beatrice Sterling clutching her pearls, her mouth open in a silent scream of social ruin. Inside the car, the silence was different. It was peaceful. Alexander sat across from her, giving her space to breathe. Where to, Dr. Vance? He asked gently. To my mother's house, she said. I need to be around someone who knows what real loyalty looks like. Of course, Alexander said. And after that, I'd like to discuss how I can support your work. A doctor with your skill and your character should have her own department, her own wing if she wants it. Elena didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the city passing by. She had lost a wedding, a fiancé, and a future she thought she wanted. But as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the streets, she realized she had gained something much more valuable. She had found her own worth. The fallout was swifter than anyone expected. The Sterling family, once the darlings of the high society pages, found themselves ghosted by their peers. Alexander Thorne was a man of his word. His withdrawal of support from the Sterling firms triggered a domino effect. Within 6 months, Julian's firm was struggling to keep its doors open. His marriage to Laura, built on a foundation of panic and spite, lasted less than a year. Elena, meanwhile, moved into her mother Martha's small, sun-drenched cottage. Martha didn't ask questions. She simply made tea, listened, and reminded Elena that the stars always shine brightest in the darkest parts of the sky. But Beatrice Sterling wasn't the type to go down without a fight. A month after the wedding that never was, Elena was called into a formal review board at Metro General. She walked into the conference room to find a panel of grim-faced administrators. At the end of the table sat a lawyer representing the Sterling family. Dr. Vance, the board chairman began. A formal complaint has been filed by the Sterling family. They claim that you manipulated a patient's surgical schedule to intentionally miss your wedding as a form of emotional distress against Julian Sterling. They are also suggesting that you accepted improper gifts from Alexander Thorne in exchange for preferential treatment of his son. Elena felt a flash of anger, but she didn't let it show. I saved a child's life. The surgical logs speak for themselves. The logs show you stayed, the lawyer interjected, but they don't show your intent. We have witnesses, the Sterlings, who say you were looking for an excuse to get out of the marriage and used a billionaire's son to secure your future. The door to the conference room opened before Elena could respond. Alexander Thorne walked in, followed by a team of lawyers that looked like they could take over a small country. I believe I can clarify the intent of Dr. Vance, Alexander said, sliding a thick folder onto the table. This is a record of every communication between the Sterling family and my office over the last 5 years. It includes several attempts by Beatrice Sterling to solicit favors in exchange for social access. It also includes a recorded call from Julian Sterling to my son's recovery wing, attempting to bribe a nurse to say that Dr. Vance was distracted during the surgery. The room went deathly silent. The Sterling lawyer began to pack his briefcase. Dr. Vance didn't ask me for a single thing. Alexander continued, his gaze narrowing on the board. I am the one who insisted on funding a new trauma center in her name. If this hospital chooses to listen to the desperate lies of a family in decline over the word of its most decorated surgeon, then perhaps my funding would be better spent at a facility that values integrity. The board chairman cleared his throat, his face turning an interesting shade of purple. That won't be necessary, Mr. Thorne. The complaint is dismissed entirely. Alina walked out of the hospital that day feeling lighter than air. Alexander was waiting for her in the lobby. You didn't have to do that, she said. I could have handled them. I know you could, Alexander replied. But you've spent your whole life being the one who saves everyone else. I thought it was time someone stood up to save you. They began to spend time together, not in the forced, high, glitz world of the Sterlings, but in quiet ways. They walked in the park while Leo, now healthy and vibrant, ran ahead of them. They talked about medicine, about the world, and about the fear of trusting again. Alexander was a man of few words, but his actions were a constant, steady drumbeat of respect. He didn't try to change her. He didn't ask her to work fewer hours. Instead, he made sure there was always a warm meal waiting for her when she finished a late-night surgery. He became the silence she needed after the noise of the OR. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of Martha's cottage. The air was cool, smelling of pine and the coming rain. I used to think that love was about fitting into someone else's puzzle, Elena said, watching the fireflies in the garden. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, Julian and his mother would finally see me. Alexander looked at her, his expression unreadable in the twilight. You were always perfect, Elena. You were just trying to fit into a puzzle that was too small for you. And what about you? She asked. What are you looking for? I'm not looking anymore, he said simply. I found the person who saved my son. I found the woman who stands for the truth when the world is screaming at her to lie. I just want to be the person who makes sure she never has to stand alone again. It wasn't a grand proposal in a hotel ballroom. There were no photographers, no silk dresses, and no Beatrice Sterling to give her approval. It was just a promise made in the dark, between two people who had seen the worst of the world and decided to believe in the best. Julian Sterling eventually moved away, taking a low-level job in another state to escape the whispers. Laura left him shortly after, realizing that being a Sterling wasn't worth the price of admission when there was no money left. Beatrice remained in the city, a ghost of her former self, frequenting the same old galas where people now conveniently forgot her name. She had spent her life guarding a legacy, only to realize that a legacy with no heart is just an empty room. Elena Vance became more than a surgeon. She became a symbol of what happens when you refuse to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort. The Vance Trauma Center became one of the leading facilities in the country, a place where the patient always came first, no matter who was waiting at the altar. Years later, on a warm summer afternoon, Elena stood in a small garden behind Martha's house. She wore a simple, light blue dress. There were no hundreds of guests, no grand orchestra. Just a few friends, her mother, and a young boy named Leo who was grinning from ear to ear. Alexander stood at the end of the stone path. He didn't look like a billionaire or a powerful mogul. He just looked like a man who was home. As Elena walked toward him, she didn't feel the old anxiety. She didn't feel the need to apologize for her career or her time. She felt steady. She felt seen. She realized that the wedding she had missed years ago wasn't a tragedy. It was a rescue. It was the moment the universe reached down and pulled her off a sinking ship so she could learn how to swim on her own. As they exchanged vows, the only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant, happy laughter of a child. It was a quiet moment, but it held more weight than all the gold in the Sterling vaults. For every woman who has ever felt like she has to choose between her passion and her partner, Elena's story is a reminder. The right person will never ask you to extinguish your light. They will be the ones standing beside you, holding the torch, making sure you can see the path ahead. The Prescotts, or the Sterlings, might try to bury you in their expectations. They might try to tell you that your worth is measured in your obedience. But they are wrong. Your worth is measured in the lives you touch, the truth you speak, and the courage you have to walk away from anything that makes you less than you are. Elena Vance found her life because she was willing to lose her wedding. And in the end, that was the greatest trade she ever made. The sunset that evening was a masterpiece of violet and gold. Elena sat on the porch with Alexander, their hands entwined. "Are you happy, Dr. Vance?" he asked with a smile. "I am," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm running. I feel like I've arrived." And as the stars began to appear, one by one, she knew that she had finally found the one thing no money could buy and no prestige could mimic. She had found a love that was as deep and as resilient as the life she had worked so hard to save. The world would always have its emergencies. There would always be pagers that screamed and nights that never ended. But now, Elena knew that when the surgery was over and the lights in the OR were dimmed, she wasn't going back to a hollow house or a demanding mother-in-law. She was going back to a home built on the only thing that lasts, a love that knows how to wait. Her career continued to flourish, but she learned the art of balance, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She realized that being a great surgeon didn't mean she had to be a martyr. It meant being a whole person. Leo grew up to be a man of great character, mentored by a father who taught him strength and a mother who taught him compassion. He often told the story of the doctor who saved his life and became his mother, a story that became a legend in their family. As for the Prescotts, their name eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by new names and new stories. They became a cautionary tale of what happens when vanity is placed above humanity. Elena occasionally saw her old name on an old file or a forgotten award. She would smile, think of the ivory dress hanging in that dark closet, and then she would turn back to the light. Because the light was where she belonged. She had saved a child, lost a coward, and found a king. And in the grand ledger of life, Elena Vance was finally in the black. She lived her life with a fierce, quiet joy, knowing that every breath she took was a victory. She continued to work, to heal, and to love, her heart a steady rhythm that echoed the peace she had finally found. And so, the story of the doctor who missed her wedding became a story of the woman who found her soul. A story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the best thing you can do is let the wrong world fall apart so the right one can finally begin to grow. The cottage remained her sanctuary, the garden her playground, and the man beside her her greatest ally. Together, they built a life that was as beautiful as it was honest, a life that was truly, finally, their own. In the quiet moments of the night, when the world was still and the only sound was the rustle of the leaves, Elena would look at Alexander and know that every trial, every heartbreak, and every long shift had been worth it, because it had led her to him, and it had led her to herself. The ending was not a hotel ballroom, it was a home, and that was the most satisfying ending of all. Life continued its steady pace, but Elena was no longer rushing. She had learned that time is the most precious thing we have, and she was determined to spend hers on the things that mattered. The people, the healing, the love. And as she watched the sun rise on a new chapter, she knew that the best was yet to come. The morning air was crisp and full of promise. Elena stepped out onto the porch, a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked out at the horizon, at the endless possibilities of a new day. She was ready for whatever came next. Because she was Elena Vance, and she was whole. The journey had been long, the path had been steep, but the view from the top was breathtaking. She took a sip of her coffee and smiled. It was a good day to be alive. It was a good day to be her. And as the first rays of the sun hit the garden, she knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Everything was in its right place. Finally, truly, in its right place. The story was complete, but the life was just beginning. And what a life it was going to be. Bright, strong, and full of light. The doctor was in, and she was staying, always. For the rest of her days, Elena Vance would be a reminder that your worth is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It is something you carry within you, a flame that can never be extinguished unless you let it. She never let it. She kept it burning, a beacon for everyone who was lost in the dark, showing them the way back to themselves. And in that burning, she found her own warmth, a warmth that would last a lifetime and beyond. The end of the story was really just the beginning of a legacy that would live on in the hearts of everyone she healed. A legacy of courage, a legacy of truth, a legacy of love, and that is the most beautiful thing of all. As she stood on the porch, the world waking up around her, Elena felt a deep, resonant sense of peace. She was home, and the world was waiting. With a final happy sigh, she stepped back inside, ready to start the day. The life she had fought for was finally hers, and it was magnificent. The end.